Father's Day, dads. We are glad that you are spending your Father's Day with us. If you're a dad and you are here today, I don't know, I'm guessing there were memories that were coming to your mind as you were watching those different scenarios roll across the screen there. That first one, I think, was, Dad, remember that time I dropped your phone in the stream? Well, I grew up in a day when there were no cell phones, where, like, if you had one, it was in a giant bag in your car. Remember those days? And if it rained, the horn went off. Yeah, well, those were the days I grew up in, and if I were to tell my dad a memory from those days, I would say, hey, Dad, remember that time I puked all over the cab of your truck? It was a bad day. For all of us, it was a bad day. My brother was driving, it was just bad. I won't go any further. Anyway, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today, whether you are here in person or you're here online. We are thrilled that you have joined us for worship. Happy Father's Day. Dads who did the jokes, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed those. Dean, I was pulling for you. You just, in my opinion, you tell some of the best dad jokes ever. No offense to any of the others, they were very good as well. I feel like yours was just good, man. Like that wasn't a bad dad joke, that was good. Potatoes. Anyway, so we're wrapping up a series this morning. If you've been around here the last few weeks, we started a series 2 weeks ago called Rewords and Foundations. We've been talking about those things for a couple of weeks. I'm going to wrap that series up today. 2 weeks ago, if you'll remember back with me for just a minute, we talked about foundations, the importance of us choosing, physically, literally, very purposefully choosing what we're building our lives on these days. Is it an ideology or a political party or an agenda, or is it the gospel in Jesus? Friends, it's important for us to reevaluate these kinds of things from time to time. And so I'm continuing to challenge us to be mindful of the things that we are building our lives on. To wrap that message up, the reword that we tied in was repair and renewal. Sometimes if you live in an old house, your foundation needs a little work. Like it gets some cracks and there's some settling and those kinds of things. So I'm continuing to challenge us to think about places within our foundations that might need a little repair or renewal. Last week, we talked about the reword repurpose. We talked about how popular it is to repurpose things today. We talked about scriptures. We visited 3 different stories in the scriptures where at one moment God repurposed some tools and some skills, and in another moment he repurposed a situation, and then in the last moment he literally repurposed the life of a person. And so, friends, I hope you will continue to let those words bounce around in your mind, the idea of God using you and the things that He has blessed you with to repurpose. So today, we're wrapping up the series, and the reword that I want to orient our conversation around today is the word remade. Remade. I want us to ponder that word for a few minutes together. I'd be interested in knowing this morning kind of where your brain drifts to, or where it heads when you hear the word remade. Mine gets pulled in both the positive and negative direction. In the negative direction, I grew up in a house where my mom made a really delicious cherry cheesecake. Now, to this day, I still do not eat the cherries. I appreciate the juice, but I'm not interested in the cherries. And it's not New York style, like it's not firm, but it's the kind of pudding-ish consistency, you know what I'm talking about? Graham cracker crust, like deliciousness. So I can't remember if it was my mom who did this or if it was Stacy. Stacy's made this cherry cheesecake a few times over the years, but we learned that one of the most important ingredients in this kind of cherry cheesecake is lemon juice, right? And it's not for the taste, friends, but it's for the consistency. So if you don't use lemon juice, it is literally like cherry cheese soup. Like it is super soupy. And so the lemon juice, for I don't even know what reason, it firms it up and gives it a consistency where you can actually cut it and dish it out like you would a pie. So in that, I don't think we remade it though. And in the example I'm thinking of, I think we just literally ate it like soup. Like it was good enough that we didn't have to remake it. Like it just good. Another not so great direction my brain goes in when I think about things being remade is my uncle. And speaking of my uncle, I haven't formally introduced my Aunt Kim. Aunt Kim, would you raise your hand? That's my Aunt Kim. She's moved down here from Arkansas a few weeks ago. We are renting the parsonage to her. She's a fantastic lady. If she has yet to meet you and you've been here prior to today, I'm disappointed. I want you to meet her. Make her feel loved. She is a part of this family. But anyway, her older brother, my Uncle Bob, her brother Bob, has a tattoo on his forearm. Back in his, I'm not going to go as deep as you think I am. Back in his military days, if you were, many of us have a history in the military, we're connected with those kinds of folks. You've seen some of the tattoos that folks get when they're in the military, haven't you? Yeah, so back in the military days, my uncle's military days, he got this tattoo on his forearm. Not up here where you can cover it up or anywhere else, like right on his forearm. And it's of a lady. And as you can imagine, in his military days, she was without attire. I'll just leave it there, right? So at some point, my uncle had to have this tattoo remade. He had to have some clothing put on this lovely lady, right? So I don't know where your mind goes in the not so great direction when you think of remade, but those are some of the places my mind goes. Now, positive side of things. Friends, in the world of medicine, they remake all kinds of things today, right? Like hips and knees and head, shoulders, knees and toes. Like, I don't know about those things, but hips and knees. And if I got a hip replacement lately, or a knee, or a shoulder, come on, some of you got fake body parts. I know you do. We need to know, friends, because when you die, we're gonna part you out. We're gonna part you out. So your metal hip on the black market. Okay. You're not going to laugh at that. I can't do any better. They can remake limbs, like arms and legs and skin and hair and those kinds of things today. It's astounding the things they can do with medicine. Another direction my brain goes when I think of things being remade are beautiful altars. Have you seen them lately? They look totally transformed from what they were. Miss Callie Foskey has a lot to do with that. She and a couple of folks banded together, repainted them, and recovered them and to fit into our room. But if you haven't looked at them up close, just swing by after service. They are beautiful, beautiful. A great example of how something can be remade, right? So as soon as I started thinking about this whole idea of orienting our conversation around rewords, a particular text came to my mind. And this word was one of the first that came to my mind, this idea of being remade. And the text that my brain jumped to is in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 21, and it's verses 1 through 7. So I'd love for us to look at those words together this morning. If you have a Bible, you're welcome to turn there. If you would rather not, you can just follow along on the screen. I'm going to read the first 7 verses there for us. Hear the word of the Lord this morning, friends. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, and the sea was gone also. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death, or sorrow, or crying, or pain. All these things are gone forever." And the one sitting on the throne said, "Look, I am making everything new." And then he said to me, "Write this down. What I tell you is trustworthy and true." And he also said, "It is finished. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To all who are thirsty, I will give freely from the springs of the water of life. And all who are victorious will inherit all these blessings, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." Friends, join me in prayer, would you? God, we are grateful today, Lord. Grateful to sit and even just to hear your word read aloud, God. My prayer today, Lord, is that you would work in us. Would you dismiss distractions from this place, burdens that we have dragged in here with us, things that will pull and claw at our attention for the next few minutes? Would you free us of those things, God? And would you speak to us through the scriptures? And would you point us toward your son, Jesus, and might the love that he has for us get inside of us so much so that it changes who we are. Lord, we're thankful today to be here in this moment to share it together. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. So before I deal specifically with our text from Revelation this morning, I want to tell you about a person and a book that have really approached the way that I deal with the book of Revelation. There are no shortages of perspectives in the world on the book of Revelation. I don't know if you know that, but man, everybody in the world seems to have a take on the book of Revelation. And the interesting thing about that is Revelation is probably the most challenging book in all of the scriptures to interpret. Like, it just is, for a number of reasons. That's a mile long. It is just super challenging to interpret. And sadly, time and time again over the years, the message of Revelation has been misunderstood and misrepresented, and in lots of ways just totally misused. So during my growing up years, the book of Revelation, as soon as it was mentioned, a sense of fear and anxiety well up within me. Surely I'm not alone in that. You have felt similar emotions when talking about the book of Revelation. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, and probably more so unintentionally, I was taught to focus on the places in Revelation as a young person that painted pictures of things that were really scary and ominous, right? Pictures of smoke and fire and brimstone and pictures of fearful looking figures riding horses that are colors they're not really supposed to be, and creatures that are made up of a whole bunch of weird body parts from a whole bunch of animals and blood and war and man, you could just, again, keep this list going for a while. And just like there are all these fears or images that invoke fears, there are also lots of words within the book of Revelation that invoke sort of fear and anxiety in me as well. Words like rapture, the rapture, and Armageddon, and final judgment, and the Antichrist, and the mark of the beast. You know all of these words, right? If you've been around church just for a few minutes, you've heard some of these words. Sadly, for most of my life, those are the images that my brain has defaulted to when I encounter the book of Revelation. Then about 10 years ago, a man that I love and respect and have the utmost appreciation for wrote a book about interpreting and understanding the book of Revelation, and it changed my perspective completely. Just completely. I have lots of favorite things about the book, but one of my favorite things is it's a book that just about anybody can understand, right? There are lots of books on Revelation out there that you open up and you read them, it's like you're reading a foreign language. It's in English, but man, there are so many different concepts and ideas and theologies in there. It makes your head spin, and it's crazy. It's possible that some of you know the man that I'm talking about. It's possible you've encountered the book as well. His name's Dr. Dan Boone, and he's the president at Tribeca Nazarene University. He's a great friend and a great teacher. And the title of the book is Answers for Chicken Little, a no-nonsense look at the book of Revelation. It's fantastic. If you have not read it, friends, there's not a better investment of $12 that you can make this morning. You can get it on Amazon for about $12, or you can get it through the Kindle app for like $3. Like, it is a fantastic book on many levels, right? One of the reasons it's a fantastic book for me is it is only 140 pages long. I love books that are 140 pages long and that have big print and small pages, right? I am not a reader by nature. My body wants to move when I sit down and try to read, and so most of the chapters in this book are about 4 or 5 pages long, so you can burn through like 5 chapters in 30 minutes, and then you feel like you've done something like productive in the day. Like, it's fantastic. I love it. But really, probably what I love most about it is just the language that Dr. Boone writes in. He tells all kinds of stories that just draw you in, they keep you tuned in. It's fantastic stuff. It would be worth your time and your money to grab a copy of that book. But my most favorite thing about the book is this. It takes a book that lots of folks, myself included, have been convinced is totally about doom and gloom and death, and it argues for a new perspective grounded in redemption and love and new life and hope. And one of the last arguments that Dr. Boone makes is that in the end, it won't be ultimately God who brings about the destruction of the earth, but it'll be humanity, more specifically the brokenness that exists within humanity. But God will be responsible for something, and that something is what heaven and earth will be remade into, friends. And I think we get a glimpse of that remaking in the text that we have in front of us today. So, something that caught my attention early on this past week as I began to kind of dig into Revelation 21, 1 through 7, was a couple of words in verse 2. So in verse 2, John writes that he saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down. Those words, coming down, are super interesting to me. The reason they're super interesting is because they're completely the opposite of what I was taught to believe as a kid growing up. I was taught that before things got really ugly on the earth, there would be this thing called the what? The rapture. That's exactly right. Some of you have heard of it. It's a moment where those who believe in Jesus get kind of sucked up into heaven and out of this world, and everything and everyone left behind kind of goes into the toilet, right? That's what happens. The idea of the rapture is interesting to me in so many ways. Did you know that the word rapture never happens in the scriptures? If you were to Google today, rapture in the Bible, you won't find that word in the scriptures. It comes from a Latin word, the Latin word rapturo, and I'll remind you that that's not even an original language of the scriptures. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament was written in Greek. And so the Latin word rapturo is derived from the Greek word harpazo. And that word harpazo does not even happen within the book of Revelation. It does not, friends. That is so interesting to me. It happens in the book of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 4, verse 17, to be specific. And so every time I'm reminded that the word rapture doesn't even happen within the book of Revelation, it just blows my mind a little bit, because for the first half of my life, that is exactly one of the first places my brain would jump to whenever I would encounter the book of Revelation. So I tell you that to point out the fact that it's amazing to me, friends, that sometimes ways that we view and approach the scriptures are far more formed and shaped by external forces than they are by the scriptures themselves. Isn't that interesting? That is so interesting. I wonder if you've ever given much thought to who and what has influenced the way that you understand the scriptures, particularly challenging places in the scriptures like the book of Revelation. Friends, I will be the first to confess that none of us have it all figured out when it comes to the scriptures. 7.5 years of my life I've given to theological study and education and those kinds of things. And I'll be the first to tell you, I don't have anywhere near all of it figured out. There's room for all of us to grow, friends, in our understanding of the scriptures. So I wonder if God might be inviting some of us down a path of deeper understanding this morning. I wonder if he might be desiring to remake, if you will, some of the ways that we've come to understand the scriptures today. I don't know. Maybe he's speaking to some of us about that. Now, back to the words coming down. So part of the reason why the words coming down capture my attention in our text this morning is because they're the exact opposite of the rapture, right? Exact opposite. As we've already established, in the rapture school of thought, the God folk get snatched up. That's literally one of the ways to translate the Greek word that rapture comes from. Snatched up before God destroys the earth, along with evil and unbelievers, and at least those are the things that I remember from when I was taught as a kid. Now in Revelation 21:2, John writes that the New Jerusalem comes down from heaven. It comes down. Friends, you understand what that means, right? It means that in the end, the earth doesn't get destroyed. But instead, the earth gets remade. It's remade. When I begin to think about that idea of God remaking the earth biblically, my brain starts to go to some very particular places in the scripture. And man, it starts to make a whole lot of sense. The first place it goes to is the model that Jesus gave his disciples to pray in Matthew chapter 6 in the Sermon on the Mount. We know it as the Lord's Prayer. You remember it, right? Yes, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And Jesus says, thy kingdom come. Thy kingdom come. Have you ever given any thought to those words, especially as it relates to rapture theology? It just doesn't mesh very well. Jesus didn't tell folks to pray, Lord, hurry up and come on down here and take us up to heaven. He told them to pray, God, may your kingdom come here. Here. That is so fascinating to me. Another place my brain goes is all the way back to the beginning, in the opening pages of the scriptures. This too is another story that lots of us are familiar with. In the verses of Genesis chapter 1, we read about a God who could have easily just snapped his fingers and brought about the existence of earth and all of its inhabitants, right? And wouldn't it be cool to have that kind of power? Just snap your fingers and make anything happen. Love that. That's scary. But instead of snapping his fingers, in Genesis 1, we read about a God who labors. Friends, he labors over the creation of the earth, and after 6 long days, over the course of 6 long days, he thoughtfully and meticulously and lovingly forms and shapes and brings to life a creation that is astoundingly and amazingly beautiful, right? Yeah, the last verse in Genesis chapter 1 says that when he finished creating, God looked over all that he had made, and he didn't just say that it was good. He said that it was very good. When it comes to this verse, friends, traditionally I think we have a really bad habit. You ever had a bad habit before? Man, when I was in about, I think it's about the third grade, I decided I was going to start cussing. Boy, I got really good at it, I'll just tell you that. And man, I could not kick that bad habit until after I was out of high school. Like, now I know some of you look at me and say, I can totally see that. And some of you are like, no, he's too sweet of a guy. I can't never hear a bad word come out of your mouth. Let me tell you, friends, they have come out of my mouth. Anyway, bad habits, friends. Bad habits are hard to break. So the bad habit that we have when it comes to Genesis chapter 1, verse 31 is we have a tendency to read this verse and understand it to say that God looked at us and God looked at humanity and said it is good, they are very good, but that's not what the verse says. It says that God looked over all that he had made. Again, friends, there seems to be no shortage of voices in the world that argue, that try to convince us that God cares about humanity first and humanity only. But if you use the scriptures as a lens to understand some other things within the scriptures, it's really hard to get to that conclusion. The story of Noah and the ark is another place my mind drifts to when I think about God's love for creation. Friends, if it's only humanity that God cares about, then why in the world did he have Noah build that giant boat and put all those animals on it, right? If it were me, I'd have told him leave the people off. Like, leave the animals on. Like, people can stay off, man. Makes me think about dogs. The fact that they all go to heaven. That's what Disney said, man. They all go to heaven. I think that's right. So there's one more text that I have to mention, and I don't know if I'm going to step off my soapbox or not, but it's a text that you guys have heard me talk about before, and I promise you it's a text you'll hear me talk about again. It happens in the 11th chapter of Isaiah, and it's a passage that deeply shapes the way that I think and believe about where this whole creation thing is inevitably headed. And these are the words that Isaiah prophesied in that chapter. In that day, the wolf and the lamb will live together. You remember these words? The leopard will lie down with the baby goat. The calf and the yearling will be safe with the lion. Friends, it doesn't happen in the world we live in. Those things eat one another, right? And a little child, it's a baby, a little child like Emma, will lead them. The cow will graze near the bear. The cub and the calf will lie down together. The lion will eat hay like a cow. That's the next part bugs me. The baby will play safely near the hole of the cobra. Yes, a little child will put its hand in a nest of deadly snakes without harm. I don't want to watch that part. But nothing will hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. For as the waters fill the sea, so the earth will be filled with people who know the Lord. Man, I so love those words. In a world filled with violence and hurt and unrest today, they offer me such a great deal of peace and a great deal of hope. And friends, I hope the same is true for you. I hope that you will choose places like Isaiah 11 in the scriptures to visit often so that they might breathe life into you. Now, there are several other ideas in our text this morning that kind of pull me in. One of them is the idea of God wiping every tear from our eye and death and sorrow and pain being no more. Those words happen in the 4th verse of Revelation 21. If you've been to a funeral or a memorial service, you've probably heard those words recently. In November of 2006, Stacy and I packed up every belonging we had in our lives. We lived in Kansas City at the moment, and all of our belongings included these 2 little cute Chihuahua dogs. And we moved to Pompano Beach, Florida, just on the north side of Fort Lauderdale. And for the very first time, I entered into the ministry full time. Most of the things about being a pastor excited me. But there was one thing that I wasn't really looking forward to all that much, and that was officiating my first funeral or my first memorial service. The idea, for lots of reasons, was just really intimidating to me. I worried about knowing what to do and what to say and how to prepare for a funeral service and how to avoid being socially awkward and being next to a dead body and all those kinds of random things. It's just, I know it's weird, but So as a youth pastor, I was able to kind of slide by for a while, right? Like I didn't have to deal a whole lot with dead young people, thankfully. But then the pastor that I was serving under went on a 2-week cruise. What a jerk. That's not true. He actually texted me this morning and told me he was praying for me. He's a great guy. Anyway, he and his wife leave on a 2-week cruise, and sure enough, while they're gone, the wife of a gentleman in our congregation passes away unexpectedly. Her name was Patty Carlson. Never in my life had I met Patty. If you're thinking to yourself that it sounds like it would be really difficult to eulogize a person you've never met before, you're right. It is challenging in lots of ways, but you know, like everything else, with God's help, you do the best you can with what you have, and God always fills in the gaps. He just does. I'll never forget that first funeral service as long as I live. Not because it was my first funeral so much, but more so because up until that moment, never in my life had I felt more utilized and used by God. That feeling of purpose and fulfillment had nothing to do with words that I had said, but what it had everything to do with was representing the physical presence of God to a family that was grieving and deeply, deeply hurt. God took that moment, a moment that I was fearful and afraid of, and He remade it into a moment that has formed and shaped me in lots of ways, and it's a moment in my journey that He calls me back to often. A moment that reminds me, friends, that God is always faithful. Always. And that He doesn't need our talents and our abilities so much. Really what He needs is our willingness and our availability. And until the day comes that we're able to be with Him in person, and He can physically and literally reach down and wipe away our tears, He needs those of us who say that we love Him to stand in the gap and to wipe some tears, friends, and the folk around us, to sympathize with our fellow humans. One of the ways that I think this part of the text challenges us, and challenges me, is it invites us to ask the question, what more can I do? Let me tell you what I mean by that. Oftentimes when we encounter a person that's grieving, whether it be a friend or a family member that's in a difficult situation, we offer to pray for them, right? It's what we do. It's our go-to, and I think that's a good thing. And many of us do pray. However, I wonder if sometimes it's not just praying that God is inviting us to do in those kinds of moments. I wonder if sometimes it's not our voices that He needs, but it's our hands. It's our feet, and it's the resources that He has blessed us with. So friends, if you know someone personally this morning who's in a difficult place in life, I hope you're praying. But more than that, I'd love to encourage you to take it a step further and to give God permission to maybe help be an answer to that person's prayer, to maybe be that person that are the hands of God that wipes away tears and offers comfort. So, I'm out of time, and I'm kind of out of words too. I know some of you're really happy about that because you're ready to go to lunch. But as we wrap up, there's one more phrase that I just want to kind of skip across as we wrap things up here, and it happens in verse 6, and it's the phrase, "It is finished." When I read those words, my mind goes to a very particular place, and I'm guessing for many of us, our minds go to that same place. My brain jumps to the very end of the Gospel of John. And it's a horrific moment. Jesus is hanging on the cross. His body is broken and bruised and bloody, and he is fighting for every single breath. And just before He gives up His spirit, He manages to speak the words, "It is finished." Friends, what an ugly moment. Ugly from the perspective of violence and hate and the misuse of power, and ugly from the perspective of what humanity we are capable of when we're at our worst. Ugly from the perspective of the power evil has and what evil is capable of. But in spite of all of that ugliness, friends, we are so privileged today to live on the side of the cross that we do. We know today that it wasn't ugly that won, right? We know today that evil was only allowed to do that day what God allowed evil to do. We know today that God took every ounce of the ugliness in that moment, and He remade it. remade it into something that was beautiful and redemptive, life-giving. Friends, I wonder this morning if there are some it is finished kinds of moments in your life that God needs to remake today. Moments that are ugly, but that God is more than willing to enter into and to remake. A moment that someone or something intended for evil, like the moment from Joseph's life that we visited last week, but that God can remake into something beautiful and redemptive and life-giving. And maybe it's not even a moment this morning, friends, but maybe it's just your life. Maybe there's a life here today or that's watching online that God is just wanting to remake. Friends, I don't know where you are today. But somebody's about to know where Mike is because they're calling me. I don't know where you are today. But what I do know is that in these kinds of moments, God speaks. He just does. One of the things he says to us is this: you're loved. You are so loved. So much more than you can ever even begin to imagine. And I think that God invites us into these moments very purposefully. The reason he does that is so that he can work on us. So that he can work on us and in us for the end goal, inevitably, that he can work through us. Friends, God wants to work in you and through you today. You have enough courage to step into that conversation? Do you have enough courage to face that moment, to turn your ear to heaven, to let God say what God wants to say to you? Do you have enough courage to let him remake you today? Let's pray. God, I'm so thankful that in spite of our ugliness, you still desire to remake us. Lord, I don't know the story of every person in here, but I know my own story. And God, I know how much ugliness there is there. We all know our own stories, God. And the devil talks about our stories to us often. Tells us that God can't forgive that, and we're not worthy, and there's no way that we're really lovable. God would never deem us to be lovable. But God, that is such a lie today. Lord, in this moment, I believe that in some way, shape, or form, big and small, you want to remake every single person in this room. So God, might we be courageous enough, brave enough, purposeful enough to say, God, I'm right here. I'm listening. I'm afraid. God, I'm listening. Would you work in me? God, work in me. Reassure me that you do love me, that you can change me, that you want to use me, be your hands and feet, to wipe away some tears and give some hugs, and ultimately be a part of overcoming, redeeming, beautifying the brokenness in the creation that we're a part of. God, may we become the kind of people in the days to come that pray your kingdom down and that live in such a way that we believe it's going to be a reality. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for this moment, for these friends, the privilege of getting to journey with them. God, we're grateful for dads today. We're mindful of the fact that we have dads because we have a big dad up in heaven who really loves us a whole lot. So thanks for that today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.